Have you ever wondered how much data you generate daily? Because believe it or not, every single day you generate data. When your alarm wakes you up in the morning, that's data being generated. When you order food online, stream music, book a ride, or even when you use your bank card to make payments, data is being generated behind the scenes. Now imagine that's happening billions of times all over the world. That's a huge amount of data that's being generated, and it's very useful, especially to businesses. Businesses don't just collect this data for fun. They use it to make decisions like what to sell, who to target, how to stay competitive in the market, and grow as a business. And because data is exploding everywhere, these businesses need people who know how to collect this data, analyze it, make sense of it, and help to drive decisions that help the business to grow. That's where data roles come in. The problem is, most people hear things like data analyst, data scientist, machine learning engineer, and AI engineer, and everything just starts to sound the same. If this is you, trust me, you're not alone. A lot of people know that there are opportunities in data, but they do not know where to start from. So if you've ever wondered, how are these roles different? What do they actually do? Or even how you could get started in any one of these roles, then this video is for you. In this video, I'm breaking down the major data roles one by one. And for each role, I'll explain what the role is, what they do day to day, the common tools they use, who this role is best suited for, and also how it's different from other roles around it. Now let's talk about the actual data roles, starting at the foundation.
Before you have a fancy dashboard, before you run any analysis, and even before AI does anything, data has to be collected and stored somewhere. And that's where a database administrator comes in. A database administrator is the person responsible for making sure that data is stored properly, securely, and efficiently. They're responsible for protecting that turf. And on a typical day, you'd find database administrators doing things like setting up databases, managing user access and permissions, creating backups of databases, and even recovering lost data if anything crashes. Basically, they make sure that the database doesn't go down at 2 a.m. and the entire system crashes. Database administrators use SQL heavily, and so you'd find them using database management tools like MySQL, SQL Server, PostgreSQL, and the likes of that. They also use monitoring tools as well as backup and recovery tools. Now, who is this role for? If you like structure and stability, or you like to protect things, you like to work around security, if you're also someone who likes to work in the background and don't necessarily like to work with flashy dashboards, then you might want to consider the database administrator role, which is going to be a great fit for someone like you. Before the database administrator gets their work done, data has to come from multiple sources. You can imagine an organization that has data coming from 20 different spots, right? From applications, from their websites, from logs, or even hardware devices that they actually have, that their customers are actually making use of. All of these data would need to go into that database. While the database administrator is responsible for managing that database, the data engineer is responsible for making sure that the data flows properly into and out of that database. And that brings us to the next role, which is the data engineer. A data engineer builds systems that collect, clean, and move data from one place to the other. They basically make sure that whatever data is being stored or needs to be used is in the right format and is also made available. Think of them as the construction workers that build the highway through which data travels from where it's being created to where it's stored and all the way down to where it's being used. Now, along this path, they are also responsible for making sure that this data is transformed into a usable format so that by the time it moves from where it's being created down to where it's being used by the data analyst or data scientist, it's relatively ready for whatever activity they're about to embark on. So if the data analyst needs to build a dashboard, the data that they get from the database would have passed through the data engineer who sourced it from its point of creation, transformed it into a usable format, moved it into the database where it is managed by the database administrator, and then the data engineer is also responsible for building the pipeline or the highway where this data travels through down to where it's being consumed or used by the data analyst, data scientist, or BI analyst. The day-to-day work of a data engineer will entail building data pipelines, extracting data from APIs, apps, and other logs, transforming messy data into clean formats that makes them ready for use. They also load data into data warehouses and ensure that data flows automatically and reliably. They are basically building highways that this data gets to travel through from where they are being created to where they are stored and all the way down to where they are being consumed and used. Now, since a data engineer is going to be interacting with a database, that simply suggests to us that they would also need SQL for their work. So besides SQL, some of the other tools that a data engineer uses would include Python, Apache Spark, Airflow, dbt, and they also use cloud platforms like Azure, AWS, and GCP. This role is best suited for people who like infrastructure, who think in systems and scalability, generally people who like back-end work and don't mind work that is not very visual. Keep in mind that this is a very technical role in the sense that you'll be doing a lot of the technical and groundwork working with data, and you'd most especially be working with a lot of messy data since you are at the intersection of where data is being created and where it's being consumed. Now we understand how data is being created, stored, and how it moves, and the experts that are responsible for these activities. And this brings us to the next role, the business intelligence analyst or BI analyst. BI professionals turn clean data into dashboards and reports that the business team can understand. In a typical business setting, they answer questions like how much did we sell, which one of our branches is performing really well, and what's our conversion rate or customer success rate. They are sometimes also simply called business analysts, and on a day-to-day you find them doing work like building dashboards, creating KPI queries, and because they would also need to work with data, you'd find them using tools like SQL and writing queries to retrieve data from a database. They meet with business stakeholders and also translate the business needs into data metrics and visualizations. Simply put, they make data visible, and you find them using tools like Power BI, Tableau, sometimes Excel, and SQL as well, so they can interact with databases. This role is best suited for people who are business inclined and like to work with the business teams. If you're also someone who likes visual work and storytelling, or you like to see things in patterns, you prefer working with very structured questions and like to see how data can be translated into business value, then this role would be a great fit for you. Now, the data analyst. This is one of the most common entry points into the data space. And the role of the data analyst is one where this professional is responsible for digging into data and answering specific questions that helps to uncover patterns in data. So while a business analyst might focus on reports and dashboards, a data analyst will dig deeper into exploratory analysis. Besides answering what has happened, they also explain why these things actually happened. On a typical day, you'd find data analysts writing SQL queries, cleaning data, performing trend analysis, creating reports, presenting their findings through data storytelling, and even answer ad hoc questions. For example, why are customers churning? Or are sales dropping in one region more than the other? Now, just like the other professionals, because the data analyst would also be interacting with the database, they would also need to use SQL. They would use other tools like Power BI and Tableau for visualizations as well, and they would also explore tools like Excel for further analysis, and sometimes even Python. This role would be a great fit for you if you're someone who is curious, you like solving puzzles, and you enjoy asking why rather than just staying at the surface explaining what has happened. Now, this role would also require you to communicate clearly everything that you found and be able to tell a seamless and smooth data story. The next role we have is the data scientist, And this is where math and statistics come in. A data scientist builds models to predict outcomes and uncover hidden patterns in data. So, besides just asking what has happened and explaining why, they focus on predicting what will happen. On a day to day, they spend their time cleaning and preparing data for their analysis. They develop statistical models and machine learning algorithms. They also spend a lot of time conducting experiments and testing out the performance of their models, ensuring that it's working optimally and it's achieving the right kinds of results. The data science role is one that's heavy on experimentation and putting together a predictive model that can forecast future outcomes based on patterns that are observed in data. So, for example, a data scientist can predict which customer is likely going to churn, they can detect fraud, or even forecast demand for a business. On a day to day, they use tools like Python and SQL, of course, because they would need to interact with databases. They would also leverage libraries in Python like Pandas, scikit-learn, and even NumPy for numerical operations. They leverage Jupyter Notebook or other development environments, and they apply statistics and machine learning techniques in developing these predictive models. So while a data analyst might explain what has happened and why these things have happened within the business, the data scientist is more focused on what will happen in the future. And generally, this would be a great fit for people who enjoy statistics and mathematics. If you like experimentation and you are comfortable with ambiguity, like I explained, this is a role where you'll be doing a lot of experimentation and not everything might be clear when you start off. If you're also someone who loves learning new algorithms, then this is going to be a perfect space for you. Now, on to the next role, the machine learning engineer. This is a role that bridges data science and software engineering. A machine learning engineer basically takes these predictive models that have been built by a data scientist and deploys them into production systems. Basically, they make sure that these built models are usable at scale. And on a day to day, you find them deploying models as APIs. They monitor the performance of these models. They also handle scaling and infrastructure, and they manage the different versions of these models. Now, while they do all of this, they also automate the ML pipeline, being from when the model gets developed until when it gets deployed, used, and is retrained, and that cycle continues to go on. Remember, the model in this context is basically a predictive model or a machine learning algorithm that's able to make a prediction based on patterns observed in data. So, a typical example that could help explain this better is the recommendation system on Netflix. While the data scientist is responsible for making sure that there's a model that exists which looks at your watch pattern and can predict what you are likely going to watch or what you would likely be interested in, the machine learning engineer is responsible for making sure that that model actually works on the Netflix application. The machine learning engineer uses tools like Python, Docker, Kubernetes, and even ML platforms like Azure ML or SageMaker. They also build pipelines for continuous integration and continuous development. Keep in mind that this role is one that's very engineering heavy, and like I said, bridges the gap between data science and software engineering, ensuring that whatever is developed by the data scientist is usable on an actual application or system. And now to the final role on the list today. While there are so many roles in the data space and some of them interlap in terms of their responsibilities, the core thing that ties all of them together is data. And as much as this data is being produced at mass, it's very important that there are regulations around how this data is used and how this data is managed. And that's where data governance roles come in. These professionals make sure that data is reliable, is secure, is compliant, and it's used responsibly. One major thing they do is to enforce ethics in the use of data within an organization. And this kind of role becomes very crucial, especially in industries like banking and healthcare. On a day to day, you'd find a data governance expert defining governance roles, ensuring compliance with regulations within the organization. They also monitor the quality of the data that's being used. They manage ownership of these data, and they work with the IT and legal teams to ensure compliance and usage of these data ethically. They use tools like data catalogs, documentation systems, governance platforms, and enforce compliance. This role is generally best suited for people who care about ethics, people who are detail oriented and enjoy structure and standards. Also, for people who, rather than focusing on the code itself, prefer to oversee how this code is being written in a standard and compliant way. In this video, we've pretty much covered the entire lifecycle of data, from when it's generated to how it is stored, analyzed, and used, down to how it is protected, and even you who is generating the data is also protected. Now, here's what I want you to do. Go into the comment section and let me know which one of these roles is most like you. And if you're confused between two roles, say it in the comments and maybe I might make a video about it. If this video has helped you in any way, make sure to like the video, comment down below which role best suits you, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on other videos like this. Here we break down data and AI one concept at a time, and I'll see you in the next one.